Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. The team and I are certainly excited to be here discussing the project and our updates. Before we get started, I just want to give a big thank you to the CFP Board and, of course, Dr. Kevin Roth, the Managing Director of Research at the board, who has just been a huge support to all of us throughout this project. Before we get started, I want to take a second here to introduce our research team. So I am, of course, joined by the fellow researchers pictured here. We have Dr. Heckman, Dr. Collins, myself, Dr. Kushel, and Dr. Luter. Dr. Heckman and I are going to be providing a brief overview of the study. We're also going to be getting into our year one results. And perhaps the most exciting part of this is we're also going to be talking about the FPLS 24 data access. So certainly stay tuned for that. While Dr. Heckman and I are going to be going over the overview of this study, we are joined by Dr. Collins and Dr. Luter, who are going to help assist with questions throughout the presentation. So also, I invite you to submit questions over in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those throughout the presentation today and at the end as we have some time permitting. But with that, let's go ahead and let's get into it. So as a quick recap of the study, and some of you may already be familiar if you've joined us before. But as a high-level overview, the client impact study is comparing outcomes of a diverse and representative sample. When we say outcomes, I just want to note this, we're also interested in both financial outcomes as well as non-financial outcomes. And we'll get into those a little bit more towards the end of the presentation here. The households that we're looking at are going to be our CFP advised households, but we're certainly also interested in looking at the households that are working with financial professionals, but perhaps that financial professional doesn't have a CFP designation. And we're also interested in looking at the do-it-yourselfers. So these could be households who have maybe started doing some planning on their own, or maybe they haven't started to engage with financial planning or financial services at this time. We are going to be following the sample for a minimum of 10 years. And of course, as you know, today we've completed year one, and year two is certainly on the way. Today, we're going to show you some of the measured differences among these three groups. And I think also important to know, because this is year one of the study, we won't necessarily have started to perhaps capture some of the effects that we're going to be speaking about today, but we certainly would expect to see them over the course of the 10 years that we're doing the study. Now, with that, I want to begin with just the theoretical and kind of methodological issues that we are considering as we have started putting together the study and the survey, and a few of which are listed here. So first of all, thinking about the selection effects, or in other words, who is it that is using a financial professional, financial planner, and not only asking the question of who that is, but also why are they using that financial professional? Why are they using that professional perhaps even versus somebody else? So starting to get at the question of really who and why. And perhaps one of our trickier ones here, the treatment effect. So treatment effect, what measures, or what we're looking to do is measure and kind of capture that financial planning process. Now, within that, as you would imagine, there are a few different issues for us to consider. There's the heterogeneity issues, or categorizing folks into the three groups of that CFP professional, the non-CFP professional, and the do-it-yourselfers. There are considerations for those that are using a CFP professional, but perhaps they're using a CFP professional and somebody else. And in addition to that, inside of the treatment effect, we're also considering the comprehensiveness and the frequency of the services that they could be receiving. So perhaps they're having more of a limited engagement, a one-time engagement. It could be something that is more ongoing, more comprehensive, more in-depth. And so really, again, capturing that planning process and the treatment effect. And then finally, looking at the outcomes. So, how does using a planner impact people? And as we're looking at these outcomes and these measures, we're also really being mindful that we're measuring these outcomes in a way that can be easily understood by consumers, understood by the planning professionals. So, some of you who are on the call today, really considering that the information and the findings of this study are applicable to the work that you all are doing. And then, certainly, as researchers, and how this is going to help impact the field and the study and our understanding of financial planning and its impact. Now, all of these measures have been pilot tested as a part of the data collection, and we've continued to really refine and help develop the survey itself through the pilot testing. But as I mentioned today, this is some background for you all. We're going to get into focusing on the first year of data. Now, with that, here we are. We are with the Financial Planning Longitudinal Study of 2024, or otherwise referred to as the FPLS 24. And we're going to start with just a quick overview of our target sample. Now, again, if you've joined us for previous conversations or previous webinars, this target sample may look a little bit familiar, but we've made an update in there. So again, as we get started here, we are looking at households who are age 25 to 65 years of age with a minimum household income of $50,000 and minimum investable assets now of $30,000. And I say now because our initial target was 50,000 in investable assets, but we have lowered it to 30,000 to allow households into the sample that may transition into our target population during the study. So we have continued to discuss the target population as we've been working because we do believe that there are some really, really great opportunities to expand the groups that we're capturing here. And also thinking about groups who may not have traditionally been seeking financial services, or perhaps they're still building in their investable assets and they will transition into using financial planning services. We want to capture that, especially because we have this 10 years to be able to look at. In addition to that, we're requiring a minimum of high school education or something equivalent. Beyond that, we're also looking at the financial decision maker. So we asked people, are you responsible for making financial decisions in your household? Now, we asked if they were either the primary decision maker, perhaps they shared in that decision making, or they don't have any participation at all. And for purposes of the study, we're capturing the primary or the shared decision maker. And the reason for doing that is we're really looking for somebody who has the information to accurately capture the data that we're interested in. This could be especially important when we're asking questions, let's say, about things like financial management. We want to make sure that they can, of course, accurately speak to that. Further, we're also capturing those who are currently employed or perhaps retired or recently retired. So that could be within the last year. And similar to kind of the other discussions here, we're doing this in an effort to also capture that transition, especially a key life transition such as retirement. Now, the data was collected over this past summer, so July of 2024, and we had a total of just over 4,000. Now, perhaps one of the, honestly, kind of the coolest part of the study is that it is a longitudinal design. So as I've kind of mentioned here, we have the opportunity to observe individuals as they begin to maybe enter into a financial planning relationship, perhaps alter or change that financial planning relationship, or in some cases, they may even perhaps end that relationship. And because we've given such a wide range of some of these minimums, again, we have the opportunity to really see how financial planning is used, how it's used over time. And because we have the next 10 years to look at participants, we're expecting that they're going to go through their own life transitions. And as those life transitions occur, it could possibly start prompt them to either start or maybe even shift their planning engagement. So that is going to be super insightful for us over the next 10 years. I did want to note that we have a forthcoming FPR article. This is called Introducing the Financial Planning Longitudinal Study, and this is a full descriptive report. I don't believe that it is published quite yet, but it is certainly on its way, so keep your eyes out for that. And for this study, I have to take a moment to mention that we have the wonderful research partners at NORC. They are the ones who have helped us capture this data through their AmeriSpeak panel, and they'll continue to help us capture this as we move forward. But we are super fortunate and appreciative of the partnership that we maintain with NORC. So as I mentioned, we got a little over 4,000 respondents for these data. And of course, one of the key questions of the survey is, who is it that uses a financial planner, a financial professional? Which honestly may sound like a rather straightforward question, but it turns out it's actually pretty tricky because turns out that not everyone identifies themselves as perhaps using a financial planner, and in particular, even a CFP professional. So it's not something that everybody was uh, completely sure of. So overall, 33% said that they use a financial planner. Now, of those 33%, we can see that a little over half, so 51%, are certain that their planner is a CFP professional. We then have about 41% who are uncertain and 8% who were certain that it was not a CFP. So we're going to focus on that 51%, those who said that they're certain that they have a financial planner and they are certain that that professional is a CFP. Now, we're also going to then categorize, we're going to take that 41%, we're going to categorize those who have a financial planner, but either aren't sure that they aren't sure that they are a CFP professional. We're going to categorize them into an other professional group. So you'll see, I just want to point this out because you'll see this referred to throughout the tables and charts as we go through this. I also want to point out that certainly this is quite an integral question to our data. And we have been working as a team and working closely with NORC to help clear up this question. We actually did a couple of runs in the pilot testing to see how we could capture this, which was really interesting, some of the results that came back. But we've ultimately landed with implementing a search function inside of the survey so that participants will be able to not only identify, but also confirm that financial professional. So we'll be doing that in our year 2. We are going to start with selection. So we're going to start with who uses a financial planner. And we're going to start with income because we do have some previous literature that tells us income has tended to be important, even in terms of a predictor in financial planner use. So beginning with income, just to kind of point out what we're looking at here, we're going to start by looking at the use of the planner. Now across the bottom, we'll see income ranging from 50,000, so our minimum, up to 200,000 or more as we move to the far right-hand side here. Now, our black bars are going to represent the unadvised population. The gray are going to represent our advised population, and the yellow or the gold bars here being advised by a professional. And these are the folks that are certain that they're being advised by a CFP professional. Now, I think you'll tend to see here that the gold bars tend to be skewed towards the higher income side, and our black bars tend to be skewed towards the lower income side. So honestly, probably a little consistent with what we may think would happen here, that those who have more resources, those who have more income, are more likely to use a planner. But it's also that in most cases here, when we look at this, when we look at the advised and the CFP advised, that we see the income tends to generally be higher. We're going to see this amplified a bit more on the next screen here. So we'll see the big differences both at the upper and the lower end. So the upper end over on the right-hand side, again, we see with the advised and certainly the CFP advised, our gold bars over here, versus or looking towards the lower end where it's just quite the opposite with those who are not using advisors. All right, as we move onto this next slide, we're actually going to remove that unadvised here, and we can really clearly see the advised compared to the CFP advised. So again, our yellow being the advised and our gray being, the yellow being our CFP advised and the gray being our advised. Now, again, we can start to see this really skew for our CFP advised towards the higher end. And if we look towards the middle here, we see this happening around the 100,000 income mark. And really from there on, we tend to see that those that are using a CFP advisor tend to be at higher levels of the income. So we did something a little bit similar here as we look at assets. So again, as we look across the bottom, we're going to look at the amount of assets that were reported, starting again with our minimum of 30,000 over on the far left-hand side, and then moving up to 3 million or more on the far right-hand side. Now, when we say assets, one kind of important note here is we are defining it as investable assets. So again, looking at our black bars, so our unadvised, and they skew towards the lower end. And again, the yellow bars, so our CFP advised skews towards the higher end. So really a similar pattern here of what we saw with income. For those that use an advisor, they tend to have more assets. And again, those who tend to use a CFP advisor versus non-CFP, have more. So let's go ahead, let's remove our unadvised again here, and we can see this a little bit more clearly. That as we move towards, again, kind of that 250,000 mark for our assets, the CFP advised generally have more assets compared to those that are advised by professionals. Now, besides the income and assets, we also wanted to look at some questions that are thought to influence the use of financial professionals. So as we look at those, we're going to get a little bit deeper into some of these categories. So again, keeping the same groups, we have our unadvised, which are the black bars from earlier, our advised group, and our CFP advised group. So initially, you'll see here we have our financial literacy score. This is a score that is very widely used, often referred to as the Big Five. And these are going to be questions that are asking about topics like the basics of inflation. Do they understand compound interest? Also the idea of like a portfolio versus an individual stock, those types of questions being asked here. Now, the average person in the unadvised group got about 3.4 of those questions, so out of 5. And the advised group is very similar at 3.4. But our CFP advised group was almost 4, so 3.9 of those questions correct. So this could suggest that those that are using a CFP professional are perhaps a little bit more financially literate than the other two groups, or at least more familiar with some of the terms or the concepts that are being asked about here. Now, we certainly can't say necessarily that an advisor has made them smarter or they're smarter because they use an advisor, but we can certainly note the difference here. We've also looked at financial risk taking, and this score is going to be out of 10. And essentially, we're asking how willing are they to take risk? Are they not willing to take it at all, or are they willing to take really kind of all of the risk that they can out of 10? Now, the higher means more risk. And for the CFP advised group, we're going to see 5.8 out of 10, with the advised 5.2, and our unadvised at 4.7. We also asked a set of questions around just kind of generally people's financial state and where they're at. So asking questions about confidence and happiness and financial socialization, as well as their perspective on the economy within the next year. So here we're going to see higher levels of confidence for our advised group at 31%, as well as using money to create joy and create happiness. They also tend to have higher levels of financial socialization. So having adults who have discussed finances in their lives, as well as looking at the expectations about the economy. Our unadvised tend to be just slightly more pessimistic here than our advised and our CFP advised, but we are interested to see how this goes, how this question looks going forward. So again, this was captured in this last summer, so we'll capture it again as we go forward in the survey. In addition to that, we also looked at sources used for financial decision making. So the financial decision making, we were also looking at these sources within a certain time frame of 12 months. And this is, I think, really interesting here. So we see that our CFP advised group, 77% are using the financial advisor, using the financial planner to as a source for their financial decision making. While we don't see this, of course, at 100%, it is certainly more than our advised group. And I do think that this can speak to perhaps some of the depth of that planner relationship that a CFP advisor may share with the clients that they're serving. Second, here we see family and friends, and that looks pretty close when we look at it. So 30% and 33%. The accountant at 28% for the CFP advised group versus the 20%, which I guess is maybe not all that surprising, as they may be brought into some of those financial decision making. And then going on from there, we have our online and digital resources, so 23% and 25%. And we find this one to be interesting. We're actually considering putting in an additional question around some of these digital resources, especially as we've seen things like AI come onto the scene, and certainly being a source that folks have been turning to as that open sourcing has become more readily available. And then from there, we see, again, relatively close markers for bank and credit unions, brokerage firm representatives, EAP programs, and lawyers. So again, kind of a great conversation for us to consider that while folks are using the financial planning professionals, also taking into consideration what other sources they could be using in their financial planning decision-making and their financial planning conversations that may come to the financial advisor. But from here, I am happy to hand it over to Dr. Heckman, who's going to lead us through our conversation about treatment and our outcomes.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Kushel. And I'm going to pause right here. We've gotten a few questions in the Q&A that I thought would be easier to just address as we're going. So a few questions around the design, especially the sampling for the data. And so a couple things to keep in mind. We're trying to strike a balance of, we want a population that is somewhat representative, that we could make inference about how people across the country might behave. And so it's important that we strike a balance there of, we don't want to just sample the upper end of the wealth distribution, because financial services, CFP advised households, other types of financial advice engagements, that can vary in terms of who they serve. And so we're trying to aim for something that gets us a broad spectrum. And so our starting point there that Dr. Kushel pointed out was our kind of a mass affluent definition that's often used in financial services. And then we made a few modifications. And so as she had gone through the income asset distribution slides, there was also a question about what those proportions represented. And so I thought I'd address that as we're talking about, from a sampling perspective, what's going on there. Those percentages, and I'll just back up a few slides, those percentages are within groups. So what you're seeing here is, among this group, what portion of respondents fell into that. It's not saying people in this group, only 6%, for instance, of the 2 million in assets group is using CFP. So it's among the CFP advised, among the other advised groups, what percent fall into that. So it's a within group distribution there, just to clarify that. And so as Dr. Kushel is talking about those selection issues, as we're interested in trying to identify what's the impact of working with a financial planner, and especially a CFP advisor, a CFP professional, if we want to be able to measure that and identify that, we need to account for these selection variables. You can't just make the comparisons among people that use and people that don't use and say, well, that's the impact of working with an advisor. We really need to account for those factors that make it more or less likely that somebody's going to sort into these different groups. Another way to say that is because we don't have a randomized trial here, we've assigned people to these different groups. We have to be really thoughtful about what factors are determining whether or not they work with an advisor in the first place. And we have to account for that before we try to measure any impacts. And along those lines, our next big area, as we've approached the project and trying to sort out how do advisors have an impact on clients, Dr. Kushel mentioned this treatment issue and there's a few questions actually in the chat that have come in about the types of services and how are we measuring that? What if you're a DIY kind of person, but you engage here and there with the CFP professional? That's exactly some of the issue that we're trying to get at here, because if you just survey, all the financial advisors out there and say, well, what kind of services do you provide? You're going to get a lot of different service models, different types of engagements, content that is addressed. And so this next set of variables are really designed to, these next set of questions were designed to help us sort through what kind of financial planning, financial service, financial advice engagement does this person have? And so we had one question that asked about what kind of financial plan do you have? And we gave some definition in the survey about what this is. So for instance, a simple financial plan, the description was, one or two planning related areas. And it gave some examples like retirement projections or cash flow analysis, college savings, etc. And then a complex plan was described as integrated planning related services, multi-service analysis of estate, insurance, and a handful of other areas that were listed just as examples. And so what you can see here, we've got we have a comparison here between our advised group and the CFP advised group. And as you look at the CFP advised group, there's basically smaller proportions of not having a formal plan, larger proportions of having a complex plan, and then it's fairly similar on the simple. So what we find is it's really the difference between the complex and not having a formal plan among the households that are advised. And then another question that we asked, a series of questions that we asked, trying to understand what does this engagement look like? We asked the respondents to rate how detailed different areas of their engagement are with their financial professional. And so these are the different areas that we asked them about: tax, risk management, retirement planning, psychology of financial planning, investments, and estate. And what you're seeing here are the proportions of people that said, my advisor provides very detailed engagement in this area. And so kind of across the board, what we see is there's a much higher proportion of respondents saying that in the CFP advised group that are saying, I get very detailed service in this particular area. And so we still have more to do with that, but we were really curious of, how can we make distinctions among the types of engagements that people have with their financial professional. We also asked about who's responsible for implementing by the same areas. So are you primarily responsible? Is your advisor primarily responsible? And you can see some more of that kind of detailed breakdown in our forthcoming paper at Financial Planning Review that has a really by question all the items available in the survey and comparisons among these different groups. So a few other questions here that we're trying to get at. What does this engagement look like? We do have a measure for how long they've worked with their financial professional. And what we're reporting here is if their engagement has been less than 3 years, it's 27% of the advised group compared to 22% of the CFP advised group. We also see a slightly higher proportion among the CFP advised group saying my financial professional handles really all the items in my financial plan, all aspects of my financial plan. So some small differences there. And two of the results that were especially interesting, just very large differences. We had items that just asked these other types of questions about what their advisor does to learn about them. And so the first question was a statement that said they make an effort, they being their financial advisor, to learn about my family and values. And what we're showing here is the percent that are reporting a lot. Basically, they make a lot of effort. And then the second one was about my spouse's relationship with money. You can see pretty large differences between these groups on those particular items. And then, so that's what we wanted to highlight from a treatment perspective, some of the differences that we're seeing there. I would summarize that area generally as it looks like the CFP professionals, the group that reports working with a CFP professional, tend to have more comprehensive, more detailed, longer term type engagements with their advisors. And then as we transition here to the last set of results that we want to highlight, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we have some previous webinars, we have some previous papers up on the Client Impact website that kind of frame how we approach this general area. I think it's a really interesting, from a research method perspective, it's an interesting area to think about, well, what kind of outcomes do we think financial planning is going to have an impact on? What outcomes do we think people that work with advisors are going to be better off? Or if they work with a CFP professional, are there areas that clients are going to be better off? And so we've kind of skipped over the kind of the theoretical setup here, but generally I'll say there's three areas of measures that we settled on to try to account for what kind of outcomes are people experiencing from their financial planning engagement. And so the first area is called resource management. And these are questions designed to understand a little bit more about what they're doing with their finances. And so the first one that we're reporting here on the left is whether they have 3 months of income and an emergency fund. And so the survey was kind of unique. What we did here is the folks at NORC programmed the survey so that we took their income and figure on a monthly basis and multiplied it by 3. And the question asked, do you have X amount saved in an emergency fund? And so what you can see here is that there are large differences between the three groups, with CFP advised groups, 78% reporting that they have 3 months income in an emergency fund. The next question tried to ask about taxes. We had a number of other measures in our initial run that we were hoping to try to get up an objective measure of what's going on from a tax perspective. We settled on this question as a question that's easy to respond to. We also tried, getting AGI information and figuring their tax. And I'd say the responses there were pretty challenging. It looked like there were major measurement issues there. So we settled on this one. So that you see some slight differences about whether people unexpectedly owed income taxes. That was really just trying to proxy for how effective their tax planning behavior is. And then the next two questions really have to do with, we're trying to get at, are they managing their risk well? So the first one was a statement, if I die tomorrow, my family will be okay financially. And we're reporting the percent that strongly agreed with this question. You can see the CFP advised group, 40% of those respondents are strongly agreeing, compared to 33% for the advised and 23% for the unadvised group. And then the next statement was really about disability. So the question said, if I'm unable to work, my family will be okay financially. And in this one, you can see that CFP advised group had about 24% strongly agreeing with that statement, compared to 18% and 13% for the advised and unadvised groups. And then our last two questions had to do with really estate planning. Do you have a will? And are your beneficiaries regularly updated? And you can see the breakdown there. Again, it looks like the CFP advised households have better performance in terms of how we would think about good financial management behavior. So generally speaking, as we look at their resource management components, we would conclude that CFP advised clients have higher proportions reporting more positive financial management. Our second area of outcomes include what we would describe as their psychological social condition. And so you can see some of the measures that we have here. The first one was a statement about whether they're worse off than their peers. And again, there you can see this is the percent strongly disagreeing, so higher would be better there. But the statement was a subjective, called for a subjective assessment about how they compared to their peer group. And then the next question, we were trying to get a sense of what is their social network like? Do they have people they can rely on in their network if they were in a financial crisis? There's a few large surveys that some of the researchers on the call might have used before that include measures really similar to this. What we find is, fairly similar across all three groups on that question. And then there's a subjective statement about I have too much debt right now. And what we're reporting there is the percent that strongly disagree. And then the last two questions are really about kind of conflict with money. So there's a measure that is a statement about how frequently they have family conflict over money. And similar across the groups, CFP advised group would be a little bit higher percent strongly disagreeing that they frequently have family conflict. And then the last item there is around money anxiety, and that's the CFP group has the lowest proportion reporting money anxiety. And then our last area, and I could point out that these three areas combine the resource management, psychosocial condition, and financial well-being. These three areas together is how we've defined financial wellness. So we're trying to get a sense of how financially well are individuals, and that is our measure that we're going to be tracking over time. So our last few questions here, they were statements about whether they're completely satisfied with their financial life, whether they're living comfortably. And then there were a number of statements, really feelings, attitudes that were given to the respondents, and they were to check which ones applied to their financial situation. Like I feel confident, for instance, about my finances. And so you can see our group differences here. By and large, the CFP group compared to advised and unadvised groups really do have higher percents that are saying I'm completely satisfied with my financial life, I'm living comfortably, and I have more positive feelings about finances. And so I'll put another plug here that those three outcome areas and how we go about putting those into a single score. We've got a manuscript in process right now. It's under review that for a peer-reviewed article, peer-reviewed journal that we're hoping will make it through that process and might be an indicator that could be used in practice. But it's really going to help form the basis. We can kind of do individual item analysis to look at group differences over time, and then we can also combine all these measures into a single wellness type score and track that over time. So that's a really high, overview, high level overview of our first year results. That's just a sampling. We did not go through every question that's available in the data set. But our forthcoming paper at Financial Planning Review that has the descriptive report will go through each of the variables and the group comparisons. So we highly recommend checking that out if you're curious. And that really wraps up, let's say, the summary portion of our webinar on the first year results. And I'd like to spend just the next 5 or 10 minutes going through accessing the data for the researchers on the call that are interested in how they can use the data that is being collected by CFP Board. So you can access the Financial Planning Longitudinal Study at this website. We also have a QR code here at the end. You can just Google search, like a client impact study. And I think the second result there is the Financial Planning Longitudinal Study. And I've got some screenshots here to show you what we have when you go out to the website. So you'll see a description about, the sampling. You'll see key findings. There's our key finding report that's available at the website. And so you can, track those documents. This is also where we'll update if there are probably like our link to our financial planning review paper, when that's available, we'll probably include there. And then as you scroll down on this page, you'll see this area that says download the files. And I want to just mention briefly what each of these are. So we have a codebook frequency table, method and transparency report, the survey instrument, and then and you can access each of those without requesting access to the actual data. And then I'll talk about the data here in a second. But each of these files, they have different information. They have important information if you plan on working with the data. So the first one, this is an Excel document that has weighted and unweighted frequencies and proportions. And I'll note that the data that's available had to be modified just slightly. So our partners at NORC at University of Chicago provide recommendations around if you're going to disclose this data in order to protect the privacy of participants, these are variables that you either need to recode or remove from the data set to prevent anyone trying to identify survey participants and that sort of thing. And if you've been around survey work, you know how important data privacy is for survey participants. And so as you go through the code book and frequency tables, you'll see notes if the last tab of that spreadsheet has a code book tab. And on that tab, if there are variables that are being reported that are not included in the public data set, you'll see a note there. You'll also see a note in the survey instrument if a variable is not available or if it's been recoded in the public version of the data. The second document is the method and transparency report. So this is really from our partners at NORC and about the AmeriSpeak panel. It's probably a good time just to highlight, this is a really high quality data. If you've ever done, sampling at, there's many websites available where you can send out a survey to survey participants. You can detail who you want to respond to. This is really high quality. They've curated a long-standing panel in AmeriSpeak, and you can read all about that panel, how the panel is formed, how they handle non-response, how they handle replacement, sampling, weighting information. All of that is there in the methods and transparency report. And then the last item is the survey instrument itself. So if you're curious, I'd really like to see exactly how that question's asked, or if there were any programming notes about certain groups didn't get that question. I mean, there's a whole series of questions that if you report not using a financial professional, you don't receive those questions. And so you can track all of that by going through the survey instrument. We also included notes there if there are variables, questions being asked that are not included in the public data set, just so you could keep track of that. So I encourage you, if you're interested in using the data, start here with these files, look through the survey instrument, look at the questions that are asked, look at distribution of responses, and get a sense if whatever project you have in mind, if the data set is going to be a good fit for that. And then if you do think it's a good fit, you should just click that button. So on the request data link, once you click that, you will get this request form. And so we are collecting just a little bit of information, just first, last name, organization, email, and how you intend to use the data. This is really common for any publicly available data set. Not all of them, but many of them will just track use. I would keep in mind, this is a good way for us to show the impact of this data. We've said in previous webinars that this is a really huge investment from the CFP board, making this data available to researchers in the field. This is really critical, and it's a huge contribution. And by being able to track, the number of uses of the data set and what projects are going on, that will help us justify, I think, the investment, show the impact really of having this data available. Also on that form, there's a couple things that you'll agree to. Two of the ones I really want to highlight here, if you are collaborating with other researchers, just encourage them to go fill in their own request form on a separate request rather than just sharing the data amongst yourselves. Again, that will just help us track and measure impact of the work that's going on here. And then There's also, we have provided in the download file a README that gives a disclosure. So if you are going to use the data and send that somewhere or present on the data, just you provide a disclosure that basically the opinions and conclusions are yours and not CFP board. And so with that, you will, once you complete that form, you'll get a link there. It'll redirect you. And what we have available here, as I mentioned, the README has the disclosure that you can use when you send off your papers, wherever you're going to send them or present. There's a CSV file, and there's also a Stata data file for those of you that use Stata. That's what we run our analysis in, and so we thought we could provide that. The data is labeled and everything, and so I think you'll find it really easy to work with. And so that is how you access the data. We're really excited to see what projects people have, what people are going to do with the data. So just a couple quick kind of summing up here, as especially the researchers, as you start using the data, we'd really love to hear about your research work that you're doing. So keep us in the loop. I also just wanted to highlight the fact this is just year one. So we went through some of the brief overview findings, just really as a reminder of this is what's happened in the first year. But the real value here is that we're going to follow the same households over time, and we'll be able to see them in life transitions as the economic environment changes. So I mean, talk about some changing economic environments here in the U.S. And across the world. But as we have these data collection events, there's going to be natural opportunities to take advantage of that variation and see how people respond. And so it's really exciting, and that ability, and it came up in the Q&A, that ability to track people and their current and ongoing or changing use of financial professionals, how their asset income situation is changing over time. All that's going to provide really interesting, valuable information as we seek to determine what is the impact of working with financial professional and CFP professionals specifically. And then I'll just end with, yeah, as Dr. Kushel had mentioned, the second year data collection is underway. The survey's finalized, soft launching within this next week, and it'll be collected here in the next few weeks. And so, so that's really exciting. Things are moving for year two, and then we'll continue to release subsequent waves. And the survey is changing between waves, so we're going to keep as much consistent as we can. But every time we collect data, we're learning new things about how people respond, and so we are modifying measures, adding things, and so we'll keep you updated on that. And as I mentioned, here's the QR code and link if you're interested in finding out more about the study generally, and that's where we'll be posting updates. And so I think with that, we'll see if there's other items in the Q&A, and I'll open it up if there's other items from any other research team. And yes, the recording is going to be posted. I'm not sure when, but I'm sure it'll be posted here within the next week on the website. Yeah, great question. I think one of the next steps for sure, and this I think is for the broader research community, is thinking about how we translate the results of the study directly into practice, how we can help demonstrate to clients the value of working with CFP professionals, with advisors. And I'd say I'd point you to, there are these first year differences are interesting. On the website, you can kind of find the key findings where people that work with an advisor, work with a CFP professional, tend to have these sorts of characteristics. That it's a different statement than a causal effect we're hopefully going to get there as well. But, I think that's an interesting starting point, that these things seem to be related. It trends in these directions. Great question here on different types of firms, different characteristics of firms. Um, we're currently exploring different, from a research design perspective, are there other ways we could pair additional information about the advisor to client data? That has a number of challenges. We're kind of working through some of what those challenges might look like. But our treatment questions are really designed to try to get at those service level differences between firms, because you're exactly right. I think this was Leo pointing out that the services, the environments they work in, there's a wide variation. And so absolutely, that's part of what we're trying to capture with some of the treatment type questions, but we are exploring other opportunities to try to find out more about the services that are being offered and the firms that are offering that, but there's a number of challenges to it. Great questions. And Daniel, I'm seeing your question about a particular kind of measure. We do have quite a bit of ability to program a variety of types of questions. But as anything, we do have to watch the survey length, and it is primarily survey based, and respondents are on their own. They're just working through the survey, different than other surveys where you might have an interviewer or something like that. But if you have recommendations about other measures, feel free. There's feedback link on the client impact website where we do take a look at comments that people are posting about suggestions of other measures and things like that. Great. Well, I don't see any other questions, so thank you all so much for joining. Appreciate your engagement and excited to see what you all do with the data.